The ring box felt heavier in my pocket than it had any right to. 3 months of salary compressed into a 2-carat diamond sitting in black velvet while I watched Helena Trenwall's mother dissect our relationship with surgical precision. "She could do so much better than you," Veda Talren sighed into her wine glass, the words floating across our candlelit table like poison gas. I waited for Helena to defend me, to tell her mother she was wrong, to show some backbone for once in her 31 years of existence. Instead, my girlfriend giggled. Actually giggled. Then she reached across the table and squeezed her mother's manicured hand. "Mom's just looking out for me, Finn," Helena said, her voice carrying that apologetic tone she used when she wanted to smooth things over without actually disagreeing with anyone. "You know how she is?" I knew exactly how Veda was. The woman had spent the last 2 years treating me like an unfortunate stain on her daughter's otherwise pristine life. Never mind that I'd built a successful software company from scratch. Never mind that I owned a penthouse apartment in downtown Chicago. Never mind that I'd treated Helena like royalty since the day we met. "Of course she could do better," I said, my voice steady despite the rage building in my chest. "You're absolutely right, Veda." Both women looked surprised. Helena's perfectly sculpted eyebrows rose toward her hairline. I stood up, the chair scraping against the restaurant's hardwood floor with a sound like fingernails on a chalkboard. The ring box came out of my pocket, but instead of opening it, I slipped it back inside my jacket. "Finn?" Helena's voice carried a note of confusion. "What are you doing?" "Taking your mother's advice," I said. "You deserve someone better than me, someone who meets the Talren family standards." I dropped a $100 bill on the table to cover our barely touched appetizers and walked toward the exit. Behind me, I heard Helena calling my name, but I didn't turn around. The maitre d' held the door open with a knowing look in his eyes. He'd probably witnessed scenes like this before. The parking lot air felt crisp against my face after the stuffy atmosphere inside. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found what I needed. "Emergency locksmith services. This is Dave. I need a complete rekey on my apartment," I said, climbing into my BMW. "Tonight. I don't care what it costs." "That's going to be expensive, buddy. Emergency calls after 10 p.m. run $180 plus parts." "Fine. I'll text you the address." Dave the locksmith arrived at 11:47 p.m., a heavy-set guy with calloused hands and the kind of practical wisdom that comes from years of helping people lock other people out of their lives. He didn't ask questions while he worked, just hummed old rock songs under his breath and replaced every tumbler in my front door. While he worked, I packed Helena's belongings. 4 years of shared living space, reduced to cardboard boxes and suitcases. Her clothes went into 3 large suitcases, her books, her art supplies, her collection of scented candles that made my apartment smell like a botanical garden. Everything got sorted and packed with methodical precision. The last item was her mother's portrait, a pretentious oil painting that had dominated our living room wall for 2 years. Veda's painted eyes seemed to follow me as I wrapped it in bubble wrap and placed it face down in the final box. By the time Dave finished the locks, I had 14 boxes stacked by the front door and 3 suitcases lined up beside them. Helena's key would no longer work. Her access to my life had been officially revoked. I wrote a note on my company letterhead and taped it to the door. "Go do better. F." Then I went to bed and slept better than I had in months. Helena arrived at 6:15 p.m. the following day. I watched from my living room window as she approached the building, her heels clicking against the sidewalk with their usual confident rhythm. She looked beautiful, as always. Perfectly styled blonde hair, designer coat, makeup applied with professional precision. The kind of woman who turned heads everywhere she went. She stopped short when she saw the boxes arranged on the lawn like a garage sale display. Her purse dropped from her shoulder as she read the note. Then she tried her key. It didn't work. She tried again, jiggling the handle and pushing against the door frame. When that failed, She pulled out her phone and called me. I let it go to voicemail. She called again. Voicemail. On the third attempt, I turned the phone off entirely. Through the window, I watched her pace back and forth in front of the building, gesturing wildly as she left increasingly frantic messages. A few neighbors gathered to watch the show. Mrs. Patterson from 4B shook her head disapprovingly, though whether she was judging Helena or me remained unclear. After 20 minutes, Helena gave up and started loading boxes into her BMW. It took 3 trips to fit everything. She had to fold down the back seats and stack items carefully, her designer coat getting wrinkled in the process. The last thing she took was her mother's portrait. She held it for a long moment, staring at the bubble-wrapped frame before sliding it into her back seat. Then she was gone. I poured myself a scotch and sat in my newly reclaimed living room. The walls looked bare without Veda's disapproving painted gaze, but the space felt larger somehow, more like home. My phone buzzed with a text message from Helena. "We need to talk. This is crazy." I deleted it without responding. Another message arrived 5 minutes later. "Finn, please. I love you. Mom didn't mean anything by what she said." Delete. "You're being childish. Call me back." Delete. The messages continued for 3 days before they stopped entirely. I blocked her number on the 4th day, along with her mother's and her sister's. Clean breaks were the only kind worth making. But as I would soon discover, Helena and her family had invested too much time in me to let go quietly. 3 weeks passed in blissful silence. My apartment felt like a sanctuary again, free from the constant judgment and manipulation that had characterized my relationship with Helena. I threw myself into work, spending long hours at my software company and actually enjoying the process for the first time in months. Then my attorney called. Ron Donnelly had been handling my business legal affairs for 5 years. He was a practical man with a dry sense of humor and an impressive ability to spot trouble before it arrived at your doorstep. "Finn, we need to talk," he said when I answered the phone. "Can you come to my office this afternoon?" "What's this about?" "Helena Trenwall, or more specifically, some financial documents that have surfaced with your name on them." An hour later, I sat across from Ron's mahogany desk while he spread papers in front of me like evidence at a trial. Joint credit card applications, bank loan documents, investment account forms, all bearing my signature. Except I'd never signed any of them. "This is interesting," Ron said, adjusting his reading glasses. "Particularly this personal loan for $94,000. According to the bank records, the funds were transferred directly to something called Talren Boutique Enterprises." "Veda's business," I said, studying the signature on the loan document. It looked like mine, but something felt wrong about the pen strokes, too careful, too practiced. "The loan was approved 6 months ago," Ron continued, "right around the time you were planning that weekend trip to Napa Valley with Helena." I remembered that weekend. Helena had insisted on staying at an expensive resort, claiming she needed time to reconnect with me away from the pressures of the city. I'd paid for everything, naturally, including the spa treatments that kept her busy for hours while I sat by the pool, wondering why she seemed so distracted. "How did you find these documents?" "Helena's attorney contacted me yesterday. Apparently she wants to discuss the terms of your separation and the division of shared debts." "We don't have any shared debts." Ron tapped the loan document with his pen. "According to this, you do. Quite a substantial one." I leaned back in my chair, pieces of a puzzle starting to form a picture I didn't like. "Ron, I need you to do something for me. I want a complete forensic analysis of these signatures, and I want a private investigator to look into Veda's business finances. That's going to be expensive. I don't care. If someone's been forging my signature, I want to know about it." The signature analysis took a week. The private investigator needed 2. What they uncovered made Helena's betrayal look like amateur hour compared to her mother's long-term planning. Veda Talren had been running her boutique business into the ground for 3 years. Expensive inventory that didn't sell. Overhead costs that exceeded revenue by substantial margins. A commercial lease she couldn't afford and suppliers demanding payment for goods she'd already liquidated. 6 months ago, the business had been facing bankruptcy. Then suddenly, a mysterious cash infusion had appeared in the company accounts. $94,000 transferred from a personal loan that I had supposedly signed. But the signature analysis revealed what I already suspected. The handwriting was close to mine, but not perfect. Someone had practiced my signature extensively, probably tracing it from legitimate documents, but they'd made subtle mistakes that an expert could identify. The pressure points are wrong, the handwriting analyst explained during our meeting. Your natural signature shows specific stress patterns where you press harder with the pen. The forged signatures lack these patterns. Someone copied the visual appearance of your signature, but not the physical mechanics of how you actually write. The private investigator's report was even more damaging. Veda had been planning this for over a year, carefully studying my financial situation and identifying the best opportunities for exploitation. She'd even hired a private investigator of her own to research my family background, my business assets, and my inheritance prospects. Your uncle's estate is worth approximately $2.4 million, the investigator told me. Mrs. Talren seems to have been very interested in your relationship with him and his current health status. That evening, I called Helena's former roommate, Mira Kelren. We'd met several times during social gatherings, and she'd always seemed uncomfortable around Helena's family. Now I understood why. I was wondering when you'd call, Mira said when she answered the phone. I heard about what happened at the restaurant. What else did you hear? There was a long pause. Finn, there are things you should know about Helena and her mother. Things I should have told you a long time ago. We met at a coffee shop in Lincoln Park the next morning. Mira looked nervous, constantly checking over her shoulder as if she expected Helena to appear at any moment. They called you the retirement plan, she said without preamble. Helena used to joke about it when she'd had too much wine. She said dating you was like having a really boring job that would pay off big in the long run. How long has this been going on? Since the beginning. Veda introduced Helena to you specifically. She'd researched your business, your family, your financial situation. Helena didn't meet you by accident at that gallery opening. Veda bought tickets specifically so Helena could be there when you showed up. The gallery opening, 4 years ago. Helena had been standing in front of a painting I'd been admiring, and we'd struck up a conversation about the artist's use of color and light. It had felt natural, spontaneous, romantic. It had been a setup. Why are you telling me this now? Mira stirred her coffee nervously. Because I feel guilty, and because they're not done with you yet. Helena thinks she can get you back. She's been telling people you had a mental breakdown, that you're not thinking clearly. Veda's been spreading rumors that you're financially unstable, that your business is failing. My business is fine. I know that, but they're trying to create a narrative that makes you look unreliable. They want people to think you need Helena more than she needs you. I thanked Mira for her honesty and walked back to my car, my mind racing with possibilities. Helena and Veda had underestimated me in every possible way. They'd seen a successful but naive businessman they could manipulate and exploit. They were about to discover just how wrong they'd been. The first step was protecting my assets. Ron Donnelly worked with my accountant to create a comprehensive audit of every financial account, investment portfolio, and business asset under my control. We changed passwords, added security protocols, and flagged any unusual activity for immediate investigation. The second step was gathering evidence. If Helena and Veda wanted to play games with forged documents and character assassination, I needed ammunition of my own. I started with Helena's laptop. She'd left it behind in her hasty packing, probably forgetting about it in the chaos of being locked out. It had been sitting in my home office for weeks, and I'd been planning to return it along with her other belongings. Instead, I took it to a computer forensics specialist recommended by my private investigator. The password protection is basic, the technician explained. Consumer-grade encryption. We can extract the hard drive contents without too much difficulty. What we found was a treasure trove of incriminating evidence. Helena had been documenting my financial situation with obsessive detail for over 3 years. Spreadsheets tracking my income, my spending patterns, my investment returns, screenshots of my bank account balances, copies of my tax returns, which she must have photographed while I was sleeping. But the most damaging evidence was a series of email exchanges between Helena and her mother, dating back to the early days of our relationship. Phase 1 complete, Helena had written after our 6-month anniversary. He's talking about moving in together. I think he's getting serious. Veda's response was clinical in its calculation. Good. Remember to establish joint accounts as soon as possible. We need access to his financial information before we proceed to Phase 2. Phase 2, apparently, had involved the forged loan documents and the systematic theft of my identity for financial gain. Phase 3 was supposed to be marriage, followed by a carefully orchestrated divorce that would leave Helena with half of my assets and a substantial alimony payment. There was even a timeline. Helena had estimated that the entire process would take 5 years, assuming my uncle's health remained stable and my business continued to grow at its current rate. I printed everything and delivered copies to Ron Donnelly, along with instructions to prepare for legal action. But legal action was only part of my plan. Veda Talren had built her social standing on a foundation of charity work and high society connections. She served on the boards of 3 major charitable organizations, hosted fundraising galas, and cultivated relationships with Chicago's wealthy elite. Her reputation was her most valuable asset. It was also her greatest vulnerability. I started with the charity boards. Ron helped me prepare information packages containing copies of the forged loan documents, evidence of Veda's financial mismanagement, and documentation of her daughter's systematic fraud. We sent these packages to the board chairs of all 3 organizations, along with a cover letter expressing my concern about having a person with questionable ethical standards in a position of fiduciary responsibility. The response was swift. Within a week, Veda had been asked to resign from 2 of the 3 boards. The 3rd organization launched an internal investigation into her activities and suspended her pending the outcome. The charitable donations that had been propping up her failing boutique business dried up almost immediately. Next, I targeted Helena's professional reputation. As an art dealer, she depended on relationships with collectors, gallery owners, and artists. Her credibility was essential to her livelihood. I didn't have to lie or exaggerate. I simply shared the truth with the right people. Helena's former clients learned about her systematic deception and financial fraud. Gallery owners discovered that she'd been misrepresenting her personal situation and using her relationship with me to enhance her credibility with potential buyers. Artists who had trusted her to represent their work found out that she'd been planning to use a fraudulent marriage and divorce to fund her business expansion. The art world was smaller and more gossipy than most people realized. Within 2 weeks, Helena's client list had shrunk by 60%. But I wasn't finished. The most satisfying part of my revenge was also the most public. Veda had been planning her annual charity gala for months, a lavish event that was supposed to raise money for underprivileged children while simultaneously showcasing her social prominence. The gala was scheduled for a Saturday evening at the Palmer House Hotel. 500 guests, including some of Chicago's most influential business leaders and socialites. Veda had been promoting the event for weeks, using it as an opportunity to rehabilitate her damaged reputation. I bought a ticket. Not just any ticket. I purchased a platinum sponsorship package that included a table for 10 guests, recognition in the event program, and the opportunity to address the audience during the fundraising portion of the evening. Veda couldn't refuse my sponsorship without looking petty and vindictive. The charity needed the money, especially after losing several major donors due to the scandal surrounding her leadership. I spent the week before the gala preparing my remarks. I wanted to be precise, factual, and devastating. The evening of the event, I arrived early and took my seat at the premium table near the front of the ballroom. I'd invited 9 colleagues from my software company, all of whom understood exactly what was about to happen. Helena and Veda were seated at the head table, both dressed in expensive evening gowns and wearing the kind of confident smiles that suggested they thought they'd weathered the worst of the storm. They were wrong. When my turn came to address the audience, I walked to the podium with a folder full of documents and a microphone that would carry my voice to every corner of the room. "Good evening," I began, looking out at the sea of faces. "I want to talk to you tonight about trust, about the importance of ethical leadership in our charitable organizations, and about what happens when that trust is betrayed." I could see Veda's face turning pale from across the room. 6 months ago, someone forged my signature on a loan document and stole $94,000 from a local bank. That money was used to prop up a failing business owned by someone who was supposed to be a trusted leader in our charitable community. Murmurs rippled through the audience. People were turning to look at Veda, whose confident smile had completely disappeared. The person who orchestrated this fraud also coached her daughter to systematically deceive me over the course of 4 years, documenting my financial information and planning an elaborate scheme to steal my assets through a fraudulent marriage and divorce. Helena stood up from the head table, her face flushed with embarrassment and rage. "This is ridiculous," she called out. "He's having a mental breakdown. None of this is true." I smiled and opened my folder. "I have documentation," I said calmly. "Bank records, email exchanges, forensic handwriting analysis. Everything has been turned over to the appropriate authorities." The room had gone completely quiet, 500 people hanging on every word. "I'm sharing this with you tonight because I believe in transparency. I believe that charitable organizations deserve leaders with integrity. And I believe that the people in this room have a right to know when someone has been systematically lying to them for years." I closed the folder and looked directly at Veda. "The Chicago Police Department is currently investigating charges of identity theft, fraud, and conspiracy. I encourage anyone who has had financial dealings with Mrs. Talren or her business to contact Detective Martinez at the 18th District." Then I walked back to my table and sat down. The aftermath was swift and brutal. Veda and Helena left the gala within minutes, escorted out by hotel security after Helena made a scene trying to confront me. The remaining guests spent the rest of the evening discussing the scandal in hushed, excited tones. The local news picked up the story the next morning. By Monday, Veda's boutique business had been shuttered, and her remaining charity board position had been terminated. Helena's art-dealing career was effectively over. But I still wasn't finished with them. The criminal investigation moved slowly, but my private war against Helena and her mother accelerated. They'd made the mistake of underestimating me once. I wasn't going to give them a second opportunity. Helena's lover turned out to be Derek Sloan, a married real estate developer with a reputation for aggressive business tactics and questionable ethics. I'd suspected she was seeing someone else during the final months of our relationship. Too many unexplained absences, too many nights when she claimed to be working late at gallery events that didn't exist. My private investigator confirmed what I'd suspected. Derek and Helena had been meeting regularly at his downtown penthouse, usually on Thursday afternoons when his wife was at her book club. They'd been careless about it, using the same restaurant for their lunch dates, the same hotel bar for their evening drinks. Derek was everything I wasn't. Flashy, aggressive, willing to cut corners to get what he wanted. He drove a bright red Ferrari, wore expensive suits, and treated service workers like they were beneath his notice. He was also leveraged to the hilt, with massive loans secured against properties that were declining in value. His marriage was a business arrangement designed to combine two wealthy families, and his wife controlled most of their liquid assets. In other words, he was vulnerable. I started with his car. Derek parked his Ferrari in the same downtown garage every day, always in the same premium spot near the elevator. The garage had security cameras, but they were focused on the entrance and exit ramps, not on individual parking spaces. I waited until a Thursday afternoon when I knew he'd be upstairs with Helena. Then I walked into the garage carrying a large coffee cup and a container of what appeared to be paint. Actually, it was a mixture of fish oil and industrial adhesive that I'd prepared in my apartment the night before. The smell was overwhelming, and the consistency was designed to seep into every crevice of the car's exterior. I accidentally tripped near Derek's Ferrari, spilling the entire container across the hood, windshield, and driver's side door. The mixture began to spread immediately, coating the expensive paint job with a thick, reeking film that would be nearly impossible to remove. Then I walked away. Derek's reaction was everything I'd hoped for. The garage security guard later told me that he'd screamed for 10 minutes straight, alternately cursing and demanding that someone be held responsible for the accident. The smell was so bad that other cars in the area had to be moved to different sections of the garage. The insurance company refused to cover the damage, classifying it as vandalism rather than an accident. The repair costs exceeded $15,000, and Derek's Ferrari spent 3 weeks at a specialty shop being completely repainted and detailed. But I wasn't finished with Derek. The real estate market in Chicago was highly dependent on reputation and relationships. Developers like Derek needed to maintain an image of success and reliability to attract investors and secure financing for their projects. I began systematically undermining that image. Derek's current project was a luxury condominium development in Lincoln Park. He'd been promoting it as an exclusive opportunity for sophisticated investors with projected returns that seemed too good to be true, because they were. My investigation revealed that Derek had been inflating projected rental rates, understating construction costs, and misrepresenting the timeline for completion. The project was already 6 months behind schedule and significantly over budget. I compiled this information into a detailed report and shared it with 3 influential real estate bloggers who specialized in exposing fraudulent investment schemes. I also sent copies to the city planning department and the state attorney general's office. Within a month, Derek's project was under investigation, and his primary investors were demanding their money back. His construction loans were called in early, and his general contractor filed a lien against the property for unpaid bills. Derek's wife filed for divorce 2 weeks later. The divorce papers cited financial irresponsibility and extramarital affairs as grounds for dissolution of the marriage. Derek's wife had apparently hired her own private investigator, who documented his relationship with Helena in excruciating detail. Under the terms of their prenuptial agreement, Derek's infidelity voided his claim to any of his wife's family assets. He was left with a failing business, massive debts, and legal bills that were mounting by the day. Helena, meanwhile, was discovering that her association with Derek was toxic to what remained of her professional reputation. The art world thrived on gossip, and everyone knew about her relationship with a married man who was now facing fraud investigations and bankruptcy proceedings. Her remaining clients began to distance themselves. Gallery owners stopped returning her calls. Artists who had previously sought her representation found other dealers to work with. But Helena and Veda weren't going quietly. They hired their own attorney and began spreading rumors about my mental state and financial stability. They claimed I was obsessed with revenge, that I'd been stalking them, that I posed a danger to myself and others. Helena even filed a restraining order request, claiming that I'd been sending her threatening messages and following her around the city. The restraining order hearing was scheduled for a Tuesday morning in downtown Chicago. Helena arrived with her attorney and her mother, both dressed conservatively and projecting an image of concerned, frightened women seeking protection from a dangerous ex-boyfriend. I arrived with Ron Donnelly and 3 boxes of evidence. "Your Honor," Helena's attorney began, My client has been subjected to a systematic campaign of harassment and intimidation by Mr. Harlow. She fears for her safety and requests the court's protection. The judge, a stern woman in her 60s, looked skeptical. What evidence do you have of this harassment? Helena's attorney presented a thin file containing printouts of social media posts, copies of the charity gala speech, and a few blurry photographs that supposedly showed me following Helena around the city. Then it was Ron's turn. Your Honor, Mr. Harlow has been the victim of identity theft, fraud, and a systematic scheme to steal his assets. Everything he has done has been in response to criminal activity perpetrated by Ms. Trenwall and her mother. Ron opened the first box and began presenting evidence: the forged loan documents, the email exchanges planning the fraud, the computer files documenting my financial information, the handwriting analysis proving the signatures were fake. Furthermore, Ron continued, Ms. Trenwall's claims of harassment are contradicted by her own actions. She has been the one initiating contact, sending text messages and emails demanding reconciliation. He presented printouts of Helena's messages, including several sent after she'd filed the restraining order request. The judge reviewed the evidence for 20 minutes before making her decision. The restraining order request is denied, she said firmly. Ms. Trenwall, I suggest you focus your energy on cooperating with the criminal investigation rather than filing frivolous legal actions. Helena's face went white. Veda looked like she was going to be ill. As we left the courthouse, Ron turned to me with a satisfied smile. I think they're beginning to understand that you're not going to be intimidated. He was right, but I had one more surprise planned for Helena and her mother, the biggest one yet. Winter in Chicago brought a bitter cold that seemed to seep into everything, but I felt energized by the progress of my campaign against Helena and Veda. The criminal investigation was moving forward. Derek's real estate empire was crumbling, and both women were learning what it felt like to have their carefully constructed lives dismantled piece by piece. But I wanted more than just financial ruin. I wanted complete social destruction. The opportunity came in the form of Helena's former roommate, Mira. She called me on a Wednesday evening, her voice shaking with what sounded like guilt and fear. Finn, I need to see you. There's something I haven't told you about Helena and her mother, something that could change everything. We met at the same coffee shop in Lincoln Park where we'd talked before. This time Mira looked even more nervous, constantly checking her phone and glancing toward the windows as if she expected someone to be watching us. I recorded them, she said without preamble. Helena and Veda. They were at my apartment 3 months ago, planning the whole thing. I had my phone recording because I was trying to document something for my therapist, and they started talking about you. She pulled out her phone and scrolled through her voice recordings. I should have given this to you sooner, but I was scared. Veda has connections and I didn't want to get involved. What changed your mind? They came to my apartment yesterday. They wanted me to lie for them, to tell the police that you'd been harassing me too. They said if I didn't help them, they'd make sure I lost my job. Mira worked as a curator at a small art museum. It wasn't a high-paying position, but it was her passion, and she'd worked for years to build her reputation in the field. They threatened your career? Veda said she had friends on the museum board. She said one phone call would be enough to get me fired. Mira's hands were shaking as she held her phone. I realized they were never going to stop. They're going to keep hurting people until someone stops them. She played the recording. Helena's voice came through clearly. The inheritance timeline is the key. Finn's uncle is 78 and he's been having health problems. The lawyer said the estate is worth at least $2 million, maybe more. Veda's response was coldly calculating. We need to accelerate the marriage timeline. If something happens to the uncle before we're legally married, we lose everything. What about the loan money? That's just the beginning. Once we're married, I can access his business accounts, his investment portfolios, everything. The divorce settlement alone should be worth at least $500,000. Helena giggled, the same sound I'd heard at the restaurant when her mother insulted me. I almost feel bad for him. He has no idea what's coming. Don't feel bad, Veda said firmly. He's a means to an end, rich, naive, and desperate enough to marry someone like you. Men like that deserve what they get. The recording continued for another 10 minutes, with Helena and Veda discussing specific tactics for manipulating me, accessing my financial accounts, and planning a divorce strategy that would maximize their financial gain while minimizing their legal exposure. I sat in stunned silence as Mira turned off the recording. Hearing their voices, listening to them discuss my life like I was nothing more than a bank account with legs, filled me with a rage so pure and focused that I could barely speak. There's more, Mira said quietly. They talked about other men too. You weren't the first, Finn. Veda has been running this scam for years, using Helena to target wealthy men and steal their money. She showed me a notebook she'd found in Helena's old bedroom, left behind when Helena moved out of their shared apartment. The notebook contained detailed profiles of a dozen different men, complete with financial information, relationship histories, and vulnerability assessments. I was just the most recent target in a long-running criminal enterprise. I'm going to the police with this, I told Mira. Will you testify? She nodded, tears streaming down her face. I should have done this a long time ago. I'm so sorry, Finn. The next morning, I met with Detective Martinez at the 18th District Police Station. She was a sharp, no-nonsense investigator who had been handling the fraud case since I'd first filed charges. This changes everything, she said after listening to the recording. We're not just talking about identity theft anymore. This is organized fraud, conspiracy, potentially racketeering if we can prove a pattern of similar crimes. What happens now? We build a case. I'll need copies of everything you have. The computer files, the forged documents, the financial records, and I'll need to interview Ms. Kelren formally. What about Helena and Veda? Detective Martinez smiled grimly. They're about to discover that the Chicago Police Department takes financial crimes very seriously. While the criminal case built momentum, I focused on the final phase of my personal revenge campaign. Helena and Veda had lost their social standing, their business reputation, and their financial stability. But they still had each other, and they still believed they could somehow salvage their situation. I was about to prove them wrong. The key was Derek Sloan. Despite everything that had happened, the divorce, the business failures, the fraud investigations, he was still seeing Helena. My private investigator confirmed that they were meeting regularly, apparently believing that their relationship could survive the chaos surrounding them. Derek was facing bankruptcy, but he still had one valuable asset: information about other wealthy men in Chicago's social circles. Men who might be vulnerable to the same kind of scam that Helena and Veda had been running. I arranged for Derek to receive an anonymous tip suggesting that Helena was planning to betray him to the police in exchange for a reduced sentence in her own case. The tip included fabricated evidence, emails and text messages that appeared to show Helena cooperating with law enforcement. Derek's response was predictably violent and stupid. He confronted Helena at her apartment, screaming accusations and threats loud enough for the neighbors to hear. Someone called the police, and Derek was arrested for disturbing the peace and making terroristic threats. While Derek was being processed at the county jail, Helena called her mother in hysterics. Veda rushed over to provide support and comfort. They had no idea that I was listening to every word. I'd hired a surveillance specialist to install listening devices in Helena's apartment while she was out. It wasn't legal, but I didn't plan to use the recordings in court. I just wanted to know what they were planning. What I heard was the sound of their partnership finally collapsing under pressure. "This is all your fault," Helena screamed at her mother. "You said this would be easy. You said he was just some naive computer nerd who would never figure it out." "I didn't expect him to be so vindictive," Veda replied. "Most men just accept the loss and move on. But he's been systematically destroying us for months." "Because you underestimated him. You always think you're the smartest person in the room, but you're not. He's been 3 steps ahead of us this entire time. Don't you dare blame me for this. You're the one who got sloppy. You're the one who left evidence lying around. You're the one who got involved with that idiot Derek." Their argument continued for over an hour, each woman blaming the other for the disaster their lives had become. By the end, they were barely speaking to each other. The final blow came 2 days later, when Detective Martinez obtained warrants for their arrest. Helena was taken into custody at her apartment, still in her pajamas, while news cameras recorded her being led away in handcuffs. Veda was arrested at what remained of her boutique, where she'd been trying to destroy financial records. The charges were extensive: identity theft, fraud, conspiracy, money laundering, and racketeering. The prosecutor's office was treating it as a major financial crime, with potential sentences ranging from 5 to 20 years in prison. I watched the news coverage from my office, feeling a satisfaction deeper than anything I'd experienced in months. Helena and Veda had spent years believing they were smarter than everyone around them, that they could manipulate and steal without consequences. They were about to learn how wrong they'd been. But even as I watched their empire collapse, I knew my revenge wasn't complete. There was still one more act to this drama. The criminal trial was scheduled for spring, but Helena and Veda were released on bail after 2 weeks in county lockup. Their bail conditions prohibited them from contacting me or interfering with the ongoing investigation, but they were free to move around the city and attempt to rebuild their shattered lives. They couldn't resist one final attempt at manipulation. It started with a letter, delivered to my office by a courier service. Helena's handwriting, on expensive stationery that she probably couldn't afford anymore. "Finn," it began, "I know you hate me, and I understand why. I made terrible mistakes, and I hurt you in ways that can never be forgiven, but I need you to know that my feelings for you were real. Whatever else happened, whatever my mother and I planned, I did love you. I still love you." The letter continued for 3 pages, alternating between apologies and justifications, between admissions of guilt and attempts to shift blame to her mother's influence. It was a masterpiece of emotional manipulation, designed to make me feel guilty for destroying her life. I threw it in the trash without finishing it. The second letter arrived a week later, this one from Veda. Her approach was different, more direct, more threatening. "Mr. Harlow," she wrote, "you have succeeded in destroying my daughter's life and mine. I hope you're satisfied with what you've accomplished. But you should know that we have information about your business practices that could be very damaging if it became public. Perhaps we should meet to discuss a mutually beneficial resolution to our current situation." I forwarded the letter to Detective Martinez, who added it to the growing file of evidence for the obstruction of justice charges that would be added to their existing indictments. The third and final contact came in the form of an unexpected visitor to my office. Helena appeared in my reception area on a Thursday afternoon, dressed in a conservative business suit and carrying herself with the kind of dignity that suggested she still believed she could salvage something from the wreckage of her life. My assistant, Janet, called me immediately. "Mr. Harlow, there's a Helena Trenwall here to see you. She says it's urgent." I almost had security escort her out immediately, but curiosity got the better of me. I wanted to hear what she thought she could possibly say that would make any difference at this point. "Send her in," I told Janet, "but stay close to your phone." Helena entered my office like she was walking onto a stage, her movements calculated and precise. She'd lost weight during the stress of the criminal proceedings, and her face showed the kind of exhaustion that came from months of sleepless nights and constant anxiety. "Hello, Finn," she said, settling into the chair across from my desk without being invited to sit. "Helena, I have to say, I'm surprised to see you here. Doesn't this violate your bail conditions?" "The restraining order was denied, remember? I'm allowed to be here as long as I don't threaten or harass you." "And what would you call this visit?" She smiled, and for a moment I saw a flash of the woman I'd thought I was in love with. Beautiful, charming, confident in her ability to get what she wanted from any man she encountered. "I'd call it a business proposition," she said. I leaned back in my chair and waited for her to continue. "The trial is going to be ugly for both of us," Helena said. "My attorney says the prosecution has a strong case, but trials are unpredictable. Juries can be sympathetic to a woman who made mistakes because she was manipulated by her mother. Is that the story you're going with now? Poor Helena, victim of her evil mother's schemes? It's not a story, Finn. It's the truth. Veda has been controlling my life since I was a child. She chose my schools, my career, my friends. When she told me to get close to you, I didn't have a choice. You had a choice every day for 4 years. Every time you lied to me, every time you stole my personal information, every time you plotted to rob me blind, those were all choices, Helena." Her composure cracked slightly. "I know that, and I'm sorry, but we can still fix this." "Fix what?" "Everything. The charges, the trial, the damage we've done to each other. I'm prepared to testify against my mother, to tell the court that she was the mastermind behind everything. In exchange, I want you to ask the prosecutor to offer me a plea deal." I stared at her in amazement. Even now, facing prison time and complete social ruin, she still believed she could manipulate her way out of the consequences of her actions. "And why would I do that?" "Because I have something you want," she said, reaching into her purse and pulling out a small velvet box. "Your engagement ring. I kept it." She opened the box, revealing the 2-carat diamond I'd bought with such hope and excitement months earlier. The ring caught the light from my office windows, throwing tiny rainbows across the walls. "I thought you might want it back," Helena continued, "as a gesture of good faith, a sign that we can put this behind us and move forward." I looked at the ring, then at Helena's face. She was watching me carefully, trying to gauge my reaction, looking for any sign that her final gambit might succeed. I started laughing. It wasn't a pleasant laugh. It was the kind of harsh, bitter sound that comes from recognizing just how completely someone has misunderstood you. "You think I want that ring back?" I said when I could finally speak. "You think there's any gesture you could make, any deal you could offer, that would change what you did to me?" Helena's confident expression began to falter. "Finn, please. We loved each other once. That has to count for something." "We never loved each other, Helena. I loved a woman who didn't exist, a character you and your mother created to steal my money. You loved my bank account balance." I stood up and walked around my desk until I was standing directly in front of her chair. "You want to know what I want? I want you to go to prison. I want you to spend the next 10 years thinking about what you did, about the lives you've destroyed, about the consequences of treating people like they're nothing more than opportunities to be exploited." Helena's facade finally collapsed completely. Tears streamed down her face, and her voice broke as she spoke. "Please, Finn. I'm begging you. I can't go to prison. I won't survive it. You should have thought about that before you forged my signature on a loan document." I walked back to my desk and picked up my phone. "Janet, please call security. Ms. Trenwall is leaving now." Helena stood up unsteadily, the ring box still clutched in her hand. "This isn't over," she said, her voice shaking with rage and desperation. "You think you've won, but you haven't. People will find out what kind of man you really are. Vindictive, cruel, obsessed with revenge." "Maybe," I said calmly, "but I'll still be free and you'll still be in prison." Security arrived and escorted Helena from the building. I watched from my window as she stumbled across the parking lot, her perfect composure finally shattered beyond repair. That evening, I called Detective Martinez to report the contact. She assured me that Helena's bail would be revoked and that additional charges would be filed for attempting to obstruct justice and intimidate a witness. 3 months later, Helena and Veda both pleaded guilty to multiple felony charges. Helena received a sentence of 8 years in federal prison. Veda, as the ringleader of the conspiracy, was sentenced to 12 years. Derek Sloan, facing his own legal troubles, cooperated with prosecutors and received a reduced sentence of 5 years probation and community service. I attended the sentencing hearing, sitting in the back of the courtroom as the judge delivered his verdict. Helena looked small and defeated in her orange jumpsuit, nothing like the confident, manipulative woman who had tried to steal my life. As she was led away in shackles, she turned and looked at me one final time. I met her gaze steadily, feeling nothing but satisfaction at seeing justice finally served. The ring she'd tried to use as a bargaining chip was entered into evidence and eventually returned to me after the trial concluded. I had it appraised and donated its full value to a charity that helped victims of financial fraud. I never wanted to see it again. 6 months after the sentencing, my uncle visited for Thanksgiving. He was healthy, laughing, completely unaware of how close he'd come to being part of Helena and Veda's inheritance scheme. We spent the holiday weekend talking about family, business, and the future. My software company had thrived during the months of legal proceedings. The publicity from the trial had actually been good for business, positioning me as someone who stood up to fraud and corruption. Our client base had expanded significantly, and we were planning to open a second office in Milwaukee. Helena's social media accounts had been deleted. Veda's boutique remained shuttered, with a for lease sign in the window that had been there so long it was starting to fade. Derek's real estate empire had collapsed completely, and he was working as a sales associate for someone else's company, trying to rebuild his career from nothing. I kept the engagement ring in my office safe, not as a memento of our relationship, but as a reminder of what happened when people underestimated me. It served as evidence of the most important lesson I'd learned from the entire experience. Never trust anyone who thinks you're not good enough for them. They're usually the ones who aren't good enough for you.